This is the second video of the series of the theory development in educational leadership. In this series of videos, I will introduce the major events and theoretical views in each decade of the field of educational leadership. This video is about educational leadership in the 1950s. You can find the rest of the video series in the description section below. In the last video, I talked about what happened before educational leadership was established as an academic field. Prior to the 1950s, most of the professors who taught school leaders were retired superintendents and school principals. They passed on their own practices, techniques, personal success stories, and anecdotes. The theoretical foundation of educational leadership did not exist prior to the 1950s. In the 1950s, some educational leadership scholars became dissatisfied with the lack of theoretical foundation. The knowledge base was criticized for being too prescriptive. The knowledge base was built on personal practices, techniques, success stories, and anecdotes. There was no theory that guided the field to produce generalizable knowledge of educational leadership. John Walton, a professor in the Department of Education at the Johns Hopkins University, wrote in his review of Andrew Halpin's book, Administrative Theory in Education. Walton wrote, "Currently, we are witnessing a renewal of interest in the field of study that is both graceless and immature. Administration." He also wrote, "In education, the interest in administration has taken a turn toward theory." Walton also harshly criticized educational leadership lacks a well-defined, highly organized body of subject matter. It has no elegant, single theoretical structure, and as literature, it is singularly devoid of aesthetic qualities. The growing dissatisfaction in the educational leadership research community was met with the rising influence of logical positivism in social sciences. This led to the start of the theory movement in the 1950s in the field of educational leadership. The theory movement aimed to build a cumulative, generalizable knowledge base that was produced from rigorous, hypothetical deductive empirical inquiries. The theory movement also aimed at developing a unique theory for educational leadership. How to develop theories in a brand new field that no theory had ever existed. Educational leadership scholars turned to the theories in the broad field of social and behavioral sciences. One influential scholar was Daniel Griffith. Griffith was born in 1917 when the United States joined the First World War. He received a Bachelor of Education from Central Connecticut State College in 1940. He then received a master's degree from the University of New Hampshire in 1949 and a doctorate from Yale in 1952. Griffith became a dean of the New York University School of Education. He was also a leading figure in the formation and development of the University Council for Educational Administration, which is a nonprofit corporation whose members are major research universities. In 1954, National Council of Professors of Educational Administration meeting, Griffith, along with other scholars, initiated the theory movement and brought theory to the field of educational leadership. The goal of the theory movement was to develop a solid, unique theory of educational leadership through hypothetical deductive empirical research. The founders of the theory movement believed that ambiguous intuition and morality that were mostly associated with personal wisdom must be replaced by cumulative, generalized knowledge base. There were many proponents of the theory movement, but it was Griffith who sustained the theory movement, both as a professor and as a dean, with a quality of scholarship that brought academic respect to the field of educational leadership. Griffith advocated the use of positivism and social science theory to advance the field of educational leadership. Griffith led the change in a field that was taught by practitioner professors using their own experiences and anecdotes to a field that was taught by research professors using social science theory and research methods. In 1954, UCEA was officially funded to improve the professional preparation of administrative personnel in both continuing education and pre-service programs. Daniel Griffith became a leading figure in the formation and development of UCEA. The UCEA website states that UCEA has been a major contributor to extending the use of more effective methods of inquiry in educational administration, shifting educational administration from an anecdotal orientation to a more scientific one, leading to generalizations about organization and leadership. In 1959, Griffith published a book titled Administrative Theory. In the book, Griffith argued that administration was a specialized branch of science. Therefore, scientific inquiry in administration must be characterized by objectivity, reliability, and operational definitions of theoretical constructs. And a theory of administration must provide guides to action, to collection of facts, to new knowledge, and to explain the nature of administration. Griffith proposed a very stringent definition of theory. A theoretical construct was not enough to be considered as a theory. A construct is like a stone. A theory is like a house. A pile of stones is not a house. To build a house from stones, a set of assumptions is needed to derive empirical laws, principles, and hypotheses. In the same book, Griffith also summarized the theories of administration into 4 groups: social system and role theory, leadership theory, decision-making theory, and organizational theory. Griffith's inclusion of decision-making theory as one of the 4 major groups of theories was probably influenced by Herbert Simon. I mentioned Herbert Simon in my last video about the theory development prior to the 1950s. In 1947, Simon published a book titled Administrative Behavior, a Study of Decision-Making Processes in Administrative Organization. This book laid the foundation for administrative organizations to be studied in a scientific manner. Simon argued that decision-making is the heart of administration and that the vocabulary of administrative theory must be derived from logic and psychology of human choice. Simon proposed the concept of organizational decision-making, particularly in uncertainty. According to Simon, it is impossible to have perfect and complete information at any given time to make a decision. It was his work in this area of organizational decision-making in uncertainty that he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1978. with the theory movement in the 1950s. As a new field, educational leadership was wrestling with its identity in scientific inquiry. The field was exploring issues concerned with the knowledge base and the boundaries as a new field was trying to establish a foothold. The research in educational leadership seemed to be disconnected from the scientific advances in other disciplines. In computer science, Alan Turing published a paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which became an influential study of artificial intelligence. The two fields of artificial intelligence and educational leadership had been growing apart until very recently, when educational leadership scholars tried to examine how artificial intelligence influences educational leaders' decision-making at the individual level and organizational level. In mathematics, John Nash proposed the Nash equilibrium in game theory, which became a classic theory in strategic decision-making. The field of educational leadership also seemed to be disconnected from the social context in the United States. Several important events in education took place in the 1950s. In 1957, the Soviet Union made history for being the first to launch a satellite named Sputnik into the Earth's orbit. It triggered the space race between the two Cold War rivals, the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Sputnik launch raised concern that the United States was falling behind, drawing attention to the science education in the United States. Scientists pushed for a science curriculum that focused on basic research. The push was bolstered by the passage of National Defense Education Act in 1958. When more than $1 billion were poured into public schools for new science curriculum. It was the beginning of the federal involvement in education, which grew stronger over time. The push for scientific education was short-lived when educators became preoccupied with the civil rights movement, which mobilized many Americans to fight for equality, including equal access to education for students of color. The civil rights movement emerged from the effort for Black Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. The Civil War in the 1860s had officially abolished slavery, but it did not end discrimination against Black people. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled in the Plessy versus Ferguson that racially segregated public facilities were legal as long as the facilities for Blacks and whites were equal. The ruling established the separate but equal doctrine, barring Blacks from sharing the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as whites. In 1954, Supreme Court ruled on Brown versus Board of Education, which led to desegregation in schools. The plaintiff was Oliver Brown, whose daughter was denied entrance to an all-white elementary schools. Brown argued that schools for Black children were not equal to schools for white children, and that segregation violated the so-called Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which holds that no state can deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The 1954 decision of the Supreme Court declared that racially segregated schools were unconstitutional. This was a landmark case in the history of education in the United States. But the theories on education equality and equity did not gain considerable traction in educational leadership until 5 decades later. This video is about the theory development in the field of educational leadership in the 1950s. We talk about the theory development that aimed to build a cumulative, generalizable knowledge base that was produced from rigorous hypothetical deductive empirical inquiries. The theory movement also aimed to build a unique theory of educational leadership. We also talk about the disconnection between the field of educational leadership and the advances in other disciplines and social contexts. In the next video, I'll talk about the theory development of educational leadership in the 1960s.